The Stasi, a state against its people. The Stasi, shattered destinies. East Berlin, 2 months after the fall of the wall. At the headquarters of the Ministry of State Secretary, the shredders are running at full speed. The agents of the Stasi, the East German political police, are destroying their files. For 40 years, they have spied, manipulated, and imprisoned their own people in order to allow the Communist Party to remain in power. But Judgment Day has come. On January 15, 1990, the citizens of the GDR storm the Stasi headquarters. They want to prevent their files from vanishing.
Hier, Ferienchecks für die Stasi! Oh, Machen die Beweismittel!
Thanks to their intervention, hundreds of thousands of personal files, records, photos, and films are saved from destruction. Among these spoils of war, 16,000 bags filled with 600 million pieces of paper, hand-shredded documents that the agents haven't had time to get rid of. Unveiling the whole truth about the Stasi and the destinies it shattered is the challenge set by reunified Germany. The task is enormous. In the next 20 years, only 550 bags will be processed and their documents reconstructed by hand or thanks to special engineered vital reconstruction software that's faster and more efficient than the human brain. More than 30 years after the fall of the wall, the former agents have broken their silence. Their testimonies, compared with those of the victims, and the revelations from the archives now shed new light on the Stasi and the dictatorship it protected. The sprawling Stasi archives bring to light a story that began with the Cold War. (1949). At the end of the Second World War, 2 German states were born. In the West, the Americans, the English, and the French validated the creation of the Federal Republic of Germany, or FRG, endowed with a parliamentary democracy. In the East, in the Soviet occupation zone, Stalin set up the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, and imposed on it the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Wir haben bei den Entwürfen zur sozialistischen Stadt die Ratschläge berücksichtigt, die uns Genosse Stalin gab.
Led by the SED, the Unified Communist Party, the GDR was modeled on its Soviet big brother. Like the USSR, the East German regime put into place a planned economy, collectivized land, and nationalized businesses. It also recruited its citizens from the age of 6 into the party's organization through the Pioneers and the FDG, or Freie Deutsche Jungen, the Socialist Youth.
Geloben, dass wir im Kampf für die Errichtung eines einheitlichen, friedliebenden, demokratischen und unabhängigen Deutschlands unsere ganze Kraft einsetzen werden. Das geloben wir!
Military training for children was provided in scout camps, and when children were divided into the good guys and the bad guys to do exercises, the bad guys were always West Berliners. To catch one, you had to shout, "Stop! West Berliner, or I'll shoot!"
Karl Lelich was 7 years old when the GDR was created. Between 1949 and 1961, Germans were allowed to travel between East and West and went to West Berlin, landlocked in the middle of the GDR. This openness quickly triggered a rivalry between the two systems.
When we went to West Berlin, life was in color. West Berlin was the showcase of the Western world. There were freedoms and consumer goods that us Easterners could only dream about. It was very attractive, and at the same time, it showed us that something was wrong in the GDR.
Was heißt Massensport? Alle sollen mitmachen. Und so turnten dann 400 Einwohner Leipzigs gemeinsam mit Walter Ulbricht.
The GDR had little to counter the seductive offer of the West. The daily life of its citizens, made up of ration cards, parades, and propaganda, was nowhere near enough to ensure the support of the majority of them. The German communists knew that in order to stay in power, they needed to make use of control and repression. Founded in 1950, the Stasi, short for Staatssicherheit, settled in Lichtenberg, neighborhood of Berlin, where it would gradually erect a number of huge buildings. It would become the sword and shield of the party, modeled after the Soviet Cheka, the predecessor of the KGB.
A Chekist had to have a warm heart, a cool head, and clean hands.
Gunther Grassler joined the Stasi at the age of 24.
The party was always good. It ran the entire country. The socialism we were developing had to be protected by the shield. And the sword, of course, was there to punish some people, to imprison them when it was necessary. That is what the sword and shield of the party was.
Das war Schild und Schwert der Partei.
In 1957, with the appointment of Erich Mielke, the Stasi experienced its real boom. A communist activist from an early age, Mielke participated in the murder of 2 policemen in 1931. To escape justice, he fled Berlin to Moscow, where he was trained in party schools in the pure Stalinist tradition.
Mielke interpreted everything through a very Manichean Marxist-Leninist grid. Good, evil, friend, enemy, us and them. His political ethics were very black and white.
Vorwärts zu neuen Erfolgen im Kampf gegen die Feinde für den zuverlässigen Schutz des Sozialismus und Kommunismus und die Sicherung des Friedens.
Mielke knew all his subordinates down the hierarchy. He was a very dangerous man.
Erich Mielke was a psychopath. Erich Mielke was a small, pugilistic man, obsessed with guns, paranoid.
Cynical and dogmatic, Erich Mielke was the ideal man to make the Stasi a tool of repression and control. His obsession? The fight against what he called politisch-ideologische Division, the political ideological division, or PID in the jargon of the Stasi.
Wenn ein sozialistischer
A whole generation of socialists were taught to become modest and enthusiastic.
gelernt hat, bescheiden und begeistert zu sein,
And all of a sudden, you had the uncle from the West who came in with his big Mercedes, the trunk full of oranges and bananas.
eine Kiste Orangen und Bananen dabei
He also showed photos of his last vacation in Italy.
vom Urlaub in Italien.
That was ideological diversion. It aroused more desire for middle-class consumerism than to immerse oneself in the study of Marx and Engels.
Rock and roll, blue jeans, long hair. In Mielke's eyes, any deviation from the socialist norm was suspect, including possession of a Bible. And it was better to be safe than sorry. By virtue of this principle, he set up one of the most efficient secret services in the world from his office on the second floor of the headquarters. With its 91,000 employees, or one agent for every 180 citizens, the Stasi was far ahead of the formidable KGB. 15 regional branches were scattered throughout Germany. Each was equipped with its own prison. The Stasi even had its own army, the Felix Dzerzhinsky Regiment, 11,000 strong. Its agents, nicknamed the Knights of the Revolution, were recruited from families that were close to the regime and politically compatible.
The GDR was my homeland, and I was entitled to be proud that I was asked to participate in its construction. We had family in the West, an aunt and my grandmother. I knew how things were going there, and my impressions weren't necessarily positive. To me, West Germany was a landmark for former Nazis. That didn't represent anything good to me. In my opinion at the time, West Germans lived in a capitalist system where they were exploited and oppressed. We, young socialists, were going to help them have a better system and a better life one day.
They approached me and said, "Here, you're going to study, and then we'll hire you as a second lieutenant." It was a great opportunity. I started with a salary of 1,000 marks. As an engineer in the civil sector, I would have earned only 600 marks. It was also about the money. Let's not kid ourselves.
Well paid and enjoying many privileges in a country subject to all kinds of deprivations, Stasi officers were part of the elite. The regime reserved apartments and special shops for the high-ranking officers. It was a community away from that of the common man.
Due to circumstances, we were operating in an environment where at least one or two of our friends were also employees of the Ministry for State Security. For the uninitiated, we used the catchphrase, "I work at the Ministry of the Interior," but everyone knew what that meant.
Everything was done in secret. In Potsdam, near Berlin, the Stasi even had its own university. Its existence was revealed when the archives were opened.
At the university, we were taught that in West Germany, there was a secret, specialized center that conspired to prepare attacks against the GDR.
Die KGU war im offenen Kampf geschlagen. Nun wich sie auf die administrative Diversion aus. So wurden Sabotageaufforderungen verschickt, regierungsamtliche Anweisungen, Bankoperationen und Lebensmittelkarten gefälscht, ohne nennenswerten Erfolg. Denn rund 300 Anschläge, 400 manchmal, dieser Art wurden allmonatlich von uns aufgedeckt.
Of course, I believed it. Why wouldn't I have believed it?
Paranoid, the Stasi also sent its recruits beyond the borders and naturally to its rival, the FRG, where its agents carried out sabotage and disinformation operations. The information collected was shared with the KGB. With the help of educational films like this one, its agents were trained in apartment searches, which were conducted by the book.
Der Spezialist öffnete mittels Nachschlüssel das Bundbordschloss um 9:10 Uhr. Da das obere Sicherheitsschloss nicht verschlossen war, verlief der Schließprozess schnell und ohne Komplikationen. Die Mitarbeiter begannen mit der Durchsuchung des Wohnzimmers und fertigten, wie auch in den anderen Zimmern, zuerst Übersichtsaufnahmen mit einer Polaroid-Kamera. Im Schrank auf dem Flur ein Romanmanuskript, die Sommerferien, 292 Seiten.
We learned the ropes, how to wiretap people, how to interrogate them, and we learned how to treat informants.
To keep its citizens under control, the Stasi set up a vast network of amateur spies recruited from the population. They were called Inoffizielle Mitarbeiter, or IM, unofficial collaborators. The recruitment process took 9 months on average.
First of all, it was necessary to see how the discussions went, how far the person was willing to go. It was only afterwards that we decided whether to make them an unofficial collaborator or not. Many people, especially from the economic sector, volunteered to become IM. One day, I recruited a company manager who had accepted because he could no longer bear the dysfunction at his company.
IM were volunteers, friends, co-workers, and even family members of the suspect. All committed to the Stasi in writing, operated under code names, and made regular reports to their liaison officers.
The Stasi was in the churches, the Stasi was in the kindergartens, the Stasi was in the schools, the Stasi was in the apartment block, the Stasi was in the artist collective, the Stasi was in the newspapers, the Stasi was everywhere. There was no separation, in fact, not only between the state or the party and the Stasi, but life and the Stasi.
In the archives, IM files were recognizable by their orange cover. The reconstruction of the archives revealed the existence of recruits with disturbing profiles. Behind the code names Sternberg and Erwin Mohr were actually former SS. Among them, Josef Stednik, a former guard at the Auschwitz concentration camp. A discovery that undermined the myth of an anti-fascist East Germany, as opposed to the FRG, accused of being more lenient with former Nazis. Ignoring its own principles, the Stasi expanded its grip on its population.
The presence of the Stasi was felt in everyday life. People were arrested regularly. The Stasi relied on intimidation, and it was intentional on the part of the regime to make it known to the people. They wanted to create an atmosphere of fear.
Despite its best efforts, the regime was unable to stop its population from escaping. By 1961, 3 million citizens of the GDR had already left for the West. As a result, the party made a radical decision.
13th of August 1961, a wall of East German police stands at the Brandenburg Gate. All communication between the eastern sector and those of the west has been cut as though by a knife.
On August 13th, the GDR closed the borders with its neighbor and built a wall through the city of Berlin that it called Antifaschistischer Schutzwall, or Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart.
I thought it was a good decision, and I wasn't the only one who thought so. What bothered me was the attitude of the people towards their own country. Many doctors were leaving the GDR and had to be prevented from doing so.
To secure the borders, the Stasi became reinforcements for the police and the army. Preventing executives and ordinary citizens from fleeing the GDR would remain its priority until the end. Moving to the West had become a crime.
This news completely destroyed me. I thought I couldn't possibly continue to live in this concentration camp. Staying in the GDR was unthinkable to me. I've always said that I was born a human being and not a slave.
Manfred was 18 years old when he decided to flee to the West. His file, found in the archives, details his downward spiral in over 2,000 pages. The denunciation by an unofficial collaborator. His attempt to flee by car, and finally his arrest on the highway. While in custody in a Stasi prison, Manfred discovered the methods of the secret services for the first time.
They shined 2 lamps in your face and yelled at you. Springer, you're state enemy number 1.
Oder wieder ein Offizier mich anschrie. Springer, bisher dachten wir, Sie sind...
Another Stasi officer told me, Springer, we thought you were just an ordinary citizen, but now we know who you really are. A criminal.
Subjekten wie Sie es sind, müsste man in eine Kuhle, also in ein Loch...
You know what we should do to guys like you? We should put them in a hole and shit on them up to their necks.
Manfred spent 2 months in Stasi jails before appearing in court. Accused of attempted flight and terrorism, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison after a public trial intended to deter citizens from fleeing.
I thought it was entirely normal to punish someone who violated the law. And I thought that regardless of what the crime was. When it's forbidden to flee the German Democratic Republic, the sanction is justified.
I never needed the freedom to travel. Neither yesterday nor today.
At the age of 18, Manfred was subjected to forced labor in several prisons of the regime in inhumane conditions.
Dann habe ich dort wegen Sauerstoffmangel
In prison, I suffered from a lack of oxygen, which caused serious skin problems. I was covered in eczema.
Und überall diese Quaddeln und so weiter. Und ich habe mich zum
And
Arzt
when I asked to see a doctor, I was told I was forbidden to seek treatment. They said I was an enemy of the people, that I was against the state and in favor of the criminal policy of the West.
Ich lag auf der Aushungerungsstation.
They even put me in a special cell where prisoners were starved. For lunch, all we were given was a soup made with water and only 36 grains of barley. Not a gram of fat, no meat, no potatoes, nothing. That's how these communist pigs wanted to finish us off.
Schweine kaputt machen.
I can't get over all of this.
Da gibt's keinen Abstand.
I really can't get over all of this.
Das ist das.
In the 50s and 60s, violence, kidnapping, and political murders were committed to keep 16 million citizens on a leash. But there was worse. Virtual reconstruction had uncovered the details of a top-secret contingency plan. Directive 167. It was a plan to imprison and isolate some 80,000 people considered dangerous by the regime in just 24 hours.
Es war alles vorbereitet, die Orte waren klar, es war Stacheldraht, es waren Betten.
Everything was ready. The internment camps were defined in advance. The barbed wire was laid, the beds were prepared. They also knew who was going to monitor these camps. And above all, they had predetermined which people they wanted to lock up. Each of them had a file. Even the names of the arresting officers had been established.
In these personal files, the smallest detail was recorded, up to the presence of a doorbell at the front door. Updated every year, Directive 167 was the ultimate weapon of the Stasi. In the event of a crisis, it had to protect the party from its own people.
Wenn heute unsere Arbeit als erfolgreich eingeschätzt wurde, so ist das in erster Linie Ausdruck dafür, alles in unseren Kräften Stehende zu tun, um die Deutsche Demokratische Republik gegen alle Anschläge und Machenschaften unserer Feinde jederzeit zuverlässig zu schützen.
Rewarded for his services, the head of the Stasi rose through the ranks and became a member of the Politburo, the country's highest political authority. In 1971, the new secretary of the Communist Party was Erich Honecker. The atmosphere between East and West was relaxing as the two enemy blocs grew closer. Within the Stasi, panic set in.
For Mielke, the Detente was kind of a soft counter-revolution, meaning a particularly treacherous method of weakening socialism. It took the intervention of the Soviet leaders and the KGB for Mielke to accept the Detente policy.
It was for economic reasons that the GDR decided to play along the game of Detente. In need of foreign currency, Erich Honecker asked Helmut Schmidt, his West German counterpart, for loans. In return, the regime had to facilitate more exchanges between the two Germanys and allow West German journalists access to the GDR. To hide its obvious human rights violations, the Stasi had to change methods. It is in this context that Tatjana Sternberg, a young employee at a Berlin hotel, fell in love with Antonio, an Italian living in West Berlin. The couple decided to get married, but Antonio did not want to live in the East. Therefore, Tatjana made an official request to leave the GDR, but she was turned down.
It frustrated us so much that I ended up saying something like, well, we'll just have to find another way. That was enough to put the Stasi on notice. Later, I discovered in my file that it was from that moment on that they began to spy on us, day and night.
The case of the hotel employee suspected of attempting to flee became what the Stasi called Operativa Vorgang, a monitoring operation. Retrieved from the archives, her file reveals the steps of a relentless surveillance.
Here are some observation photos taken in front of my house. We were transporting furniture. They took pictures of all the people who helped us, and even the objects we carried. In a report about me, I read the following. The person tailed just paid a 32 Mark and 33 Pfennig electricity bill. That means that people from the Stasi or their informants were right behind me in line when I paid my bill. Later, there were times when the agents would position themselves in such a way that I could see them in order to scare me, but also to show that they were keeping an eye on me.
Photos were taken using concealed devices. Mail was opened using machines created for that specific purpose. Within the ministry, an entire department was responsible for developing the technical means to fight the enemies of the people.
Nobody talks about the operative technology sector. It wasn't well known, but it was very important. The employees developed taping technologies, infrared detectors that could be installed in a Trabant, a type of small car. Given the limited means of the GDR, You can say that they were really divine, truly amazing.
Genial.
In addition to the technology, there was also the IM network. In her file, Tatjana discovered she had been monitored by 12 people in her friends and family circle, and in particular by a colleague at her hotel.
In my file, I found out he had made a map of my apartment. He would tell the Stasi who I was seeing, when and where, and who was taking me home, even things from my everyday life that were quite trivial.
The Stasi was spying on everyone. It was collecting everyone's biographies. It was stealing your life story, and then it was changing your life story. So it was extremely sinister.
I was lectured by the management as if I were on trial. All of this psychological pressure made me suffer a lot. I was pregnant at the time, and I lost my baby.
The map drawn up by her colleague was used by the Stasi in Tatjana's arrest. Sentenced to 3 years in prison for planning to flee, she was released in 1976 and managed to move to the West. There, she was reunited with Antonio and married him in Naples. But their marriage did not last. The Stasi had shattered their lives.
That's when I realized that this regime and its primary tool, the Stasi, hated its own citizens simply for wanting to live elsewhere, for wanting to express themselves freely, and demanding freedom.
Arbitrariness, violations of human rights. I would say that these are all relative concepts that must be handled with caution. What are human rights? To me, it's the right to have food, to have a roof over your head, to have social security. Freedom of opinion and freedom to travel are important, and you can say that they were mismanaged in the GDR. But the Ministry for State Security didn't do what it did because it liked doing it. We did them because the party asked us to.
Denn wer kämpft für das Recht, der hat immer Recht gegen Lüge und Ausbeuterei.
In the mid-1970s, encouraged by promises of political détente, the first movements of dissent emerged in the GDR. Notably in the university city of Jena, where Siegfried Reiprich studied history. Despite his long hair and passion for rock music, he was a pure product of the regime. A pioneer at the age of 6, Siegfried then became leader of the socialist student section named Agitprop for agitation and propaganda. But in the GDR, it only took one misstep to arouse suspicion.
I was part of a literature and poetry circle within the party. We used to organize local seminars, and one day a friend of mine went on stage to sing a children's song by Wolf Biermann. It caused a scandal, because in the GDR, Biermann was an enemy of the people.
A critic of the regime, Wolf Biermann was one of the few artists to perform in West Germany. His popularity in the West protected him, but in the eyes of the regime, he was a dangerous enemy.
Der Stacheldraht wächst langsam ein, tief in die Haut, in Brust und Bein, ins Hirn, in graue Zellen. Umgürtet mit dem Drahtverband ist unser Land ein Inselland, umbrandet von bleiernen Wellen.
That same night, we were interrogated by the Stasi. They knew that we came from families loyal to the regime, and they put pressure on us to officially distance ourselves from Biermann. And then, for the first time, I said what I really thought. What were they going to do, shoot me? Stalin was long dead. I never understood at the time why people were tarnishing the image of their country by criticizing it in the West. It was something I couldn't stand.
During his interrogation, the Stasi offered Siegfried to become an unofficial collaborator. But when he refused, they were quick to sanction him. At the age of 21, Siegfried was expelled from university.
It was like my professional death. This wasn't the rule of law. I couldn't leave the GDR or hire a lawyer to challenge their decision. I became a worker. I was at the very bottom of the social ladder. I was doing the worst jobs.
Was habe ich davon gehalten?
You want to know what I thought? He should have gone to class. To me, their behavior was unacceptable. I believe that everyone is responsible for their own destiny, and one must assume the consequences of their actions.
Like Siegfried, many were socially downgraded and sidelined for opposing the Communist Party line.
I would say that part of the department, especially the counterintelligence agents, understood that they were not enemies in the strict sense of the word. But Mielke didn't care. To him, they were against the decisions of the party. Therefore, they were enemies, ideological opponents.
The former pioneer and socialist militant then became an object of surveillance by the secret services. The 3,000 pages of his file revealed the importance that the Stasi had attached to him. His mail was systematically opened. Unofficial collaborators reported his every move to their liaison officers. But the Stasi didn't just gather information about Siegfried and his wife. It put pressure on the couple with particularly treacherous techniques.
Whenever we would get home, we immediately felt that someone had been there. The door was open, the light was on, and the radio was playing. It happened several times. My wife used to wash up in a small room overlooking a garden. She regularly saw a guy there dressed as a jogger who was spying on her, hiding behind a bush. All of this is in our Stasi file. I'm not making anything up.
The couple was victim of what the Stasi called Zersetzung, or psychological breakdown. A sneaky method of torture elevated to the rank of a science by the secret services.
You take the principles of psychology, a science that's supposed to contribute to the personal development of an individual, and flip them around to obtain the opposite, namely the destruction of the personality.
The techniques of psychological breakdown were taught at the Stasi University. This discipline even had its own chair. The reconstruction of the archives has given rise to theses written by doctoral candidates. Agents used them to develop destabilizing techniques.
Some examples are very famous. Stasi officers broke into apartments, moved objects, or stole only the colored tea towels, leaving the others. And of course, if you tell a psychiatrist that people broke into your house to steal your tea towels, they'll think you're crazy.
The goal was, of course, to discredit individuals within their groups. When they said that people had broken into their homes to move tea towels, they were thought to be crazy. The goal was to disrupt the daily life of the targeted individual, to occupy them so that they no longer had the strength to devote themselves to their dissident activities.
The imperceptible technique didn't replace the strong arm method. In Jena, Stasi agents went on the offense and arrested dissidents. To his surprise, Siegfried was spared. The Stasi had other plans for him. He was to become the centerpiece of a plot to destroy the unity of his group.
My friend Jürgen Fuchs was incarcerated in Hohenschönhausen, the Stasi's central prison in Berlin. That's where he was shown documents written in my handwriting and told I was confessing in the cell next door, that I was cooperating with them. Then the Stasi spread a whole bunch of rumors about me. They said I had switched camps in prison and become an unofficial collaborator. I was stuck. This was a very dark time for me.
The effect of it is really to break the fundamental human bonds that keep a society going. So the Stasi was a system that ran on fear and betrayal to run a nation and to ruin its own people.
In 1981, Siegfried and his wife were stripped of their East German citizenship and deported to the West, a method frequently used by the regime to get rid of rebellious elements. In exile, Siegfried tried to reconnect with his friends, but rumors spread by the Stasi had poisoned their relations. Siegfried found himself isolated. It would take 10 years to find his file in the archives and clear his name of any suspicion. Psychological breakdown, surveillance, arrests. In the 1980s, the system of repression was at its peak. The Stasi's obsession with control made the archives grow exponentially. 1/6 of the ministry's officers were busy managing 41 million files.
Today, we have files on people who simply passed in front of the Soviet barracks. Some of the files contain license plates of Western cars. You almost feel sorry for the Czechist who spent his time writing down all these figures.
They collected on their own people more information in written records than in the rest of German history since the Middle Ages. This was an obsession. It was perfectionizing, as they say in German, perfektionieren. It was obsessive and meticulous.
The Stasi was also expanding its network of IM, the unofficial collaborators. With 189,000 people, it had become twice as large as the number of agents. There were even minors among them, including Angela Marquardt, the daughter of parents who were both IM. She was easy prey.
I grew up on these people's laps. I was a child when they came into my life. I thought they were friendly. They were interested in me, my school, my sporting activities, but they had good reasons to be nice to me.
At age 15, encouraged by her parents, Angela signed the Declaration of Commitment to the Stasi. Her code name? Katrine Brandt.
They asked me about my classmates, for example, Silke and David. Today, I know that Silke's mother had applied to leave the GDR, something I didn't know at the time. Of course, now I understand why they were interested in her. They also tested how far they could go with me. I remember my parents asking me to write a report about David. I'm not proud of that. I was told to do it, so I did.
The Stasi tested Angela because it was preparing the next generation. Upon reaching the age of maturity, the girl was destined to infiltrate religious circles. She discovered that fact thanks to the opening of the archives.
The Stasi had planned my life up until 1995. My trajectory was already mapped out. I had to join a religious group. In my file, it was written that I would go to study theology, and once my studies were over, I would be operational.
The archives revealed that some 1,300 minors were recruited in the schoolyards. The youngest of them was 12 years old. But just as Angela was signing her commitment to the Stasi, a massive political earthquake took place. On March 11, 1985, in Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev was appointed General Secretary of the party. Aware of the enormous economic and political difficulties the communist world was facing, Gorbachev launched several reforms. In the Eastern Bloc, his projects triggered a genuine Gorby mania that left no one unaffected, not even Stasi agents.
I was an unconditional admirer of his policies. I read everything he wrote. I even obtained his texts illegally. I admired him because he gave the impression that change was possible.
To be honest with you, I thought Gorbachev was good for only about a quarter of a second. I knew full well that he was actually the liquidator of the system. It made me sad because I knew that it was the beginning of the end.
Encouraged by this wind of freedom blowing from Moscow, popular opposition began to emerge in East Germany. Starting in 1989, peaceful demonstrations were organized throughout the country. The Stasi was there to film and arrest people. But its intimidation tactics were less and less effective. It was in this deleterious atmosphere that the GDR celebrated its 40th anniversary on October 7, 1989, in the presence of Mikhail Gorbachev. This official footage showed everyone smiling. Yet away from the festivities in front of the Stasi cameras, the ranks of the demonstrators were growing. Spoiling the GDR's anniversary was the ultimate affront. The next day at the Ministry for State Secretary, the situation was critical. For Mielke, it was time to take out their secret weapon. Directive 167, put into place since the 1960s. The head of the Stasi even obtained Honecker's support. But in the face of these fathers and mothers who walked quietly with their children, Directive 167 deflated like a balloon. Peacefully defeated by its people, the party renounced violence. Having become powerless, the Stasi settled for taking note of the overwhelmingly accusatory slogans against it. Aware that the tide had turned, some of these departments were already destroying their most compromising archives. That evening, the anti-fascist Repression, so strictly guarded by the Stasi, gave way. Better yet, it was one of its agents who, in front of the crowd, had no choice but to open the first checkpoint at Bornholmer Strasse.
Da saßen die Leute zur Angst
We were all petrified with fear.
In den Dienstobjekten
sitting in the dark in our offices with the curtains drawn, hoping that nothing would happen to us.
Ich hab's ja gesehen.
I saw it on TV.
Und
it was a time when emotions ran very high.
Die Emotionen kochten.
We wondered what would happen to us. What can I tell you? It was the icing on the cake of the disaster. I was sad, very sad. People had changed overnight. They were manipulated by money. I never went to get the 100 welcome marks that the FRG distributed to everyone. I would have rather chopped my hand off.
While reunification was still at the project stage, it quickly became clear that without a Communist Party to protect, the East German secret services had no reason to exist. On June 30th, 1990, the Stasi was simply dissolved after 40 years of good and faithful service.
When the Stasi was dissolved, we had to go to the office for one last time. We had to return our service weapon, our equipment, the keys. Everyone received a bonus of 8,000 Ostmarks that had to be converted into Western marks, and it all drew to a close.
Ironically, the omnipresent and omnipotent Stasi had a contingency plan for everything, except its own downfall and that of the regime it protected.